Every human culture that has ever existed has asked the same haunting question: what happens when we die? From the elaborate burial rituals of ancient Egypt to the ancestor worship of East Asia, from the Christian concept of heaven to the Buddhist cycle of rebirth, every single civilization has built some form of belief around the idea that death is not truly the end. This is not a coincidence. There is something fundamental in the human mind that resists the very notion of complete annihilation, and understanding this universal impulse reveals something profound about what it means to be human. You might think belief in an afterlife is simply about religion, about ancient texts and divine revelation, but the story is far more interesting than that. What we are about to explore is how your brain is actually wired to resist the concept of death, how evolution may have shaped this tendency, and why even committed atheists often catch themselves thinking in ways that assume consciousness continues. By the end of this journey, you will understand the deep psychological architecture that makes belief in life after death one of the most persistent ideas in human history, and why that might actually be a good thing. Let us begin with a simple observation that has puzzled anthropologists for over a century. When researchers study isolated indigenous tribes who have never encountered major world religions, they almost always find some form of afterlife belief. The Pirahan people of the Amazon, often cited as one of the few exceptions, still believe spirits interact with the living. The tribes of Papua New Guinea maintain elaborate rituals to guide souls to the spirit world. Aboriginal Australians have passed down dreamtime stories about the land of the dead for over 60,000 years. This pattern suggests something crucial. Afterlife beliefs do not spread simply because missionaries carry them. They emerge independently, again and again, because they address a fundamental human need. The first key to understanding this phenomenon lies in what psychologists call terror management theory. Developed in the 1980s by researchers including Sheldon Solomon and Jeff Greenberg, this framework proposes that humans have a unique psychological problem. Unlike other animals, we possess full awareness that we will someday cease to exist. This knowledge creates what the researchers call mortality salience, a background hum of existential anxiety that would be paralyzing if we did not develop ways to manage it. Belief in an afterlife is one of the most powerful psychological defenses we have constructed. By believing that consciousness continues after physical death, we reduce the terror of annihilation to something more manageable, a transition rather than an ending. But here is where it gets really fascinating. Research shows that mortality salience affects everyone, regardless of their stated beliefs. In laboratory studies, when people are subtly reminded of death, perhaps by walking past a cemetery or answering questions about mortality, they become more defensive of their worldview, more hostile toward outsiders, and more likely to endorse afterlife beliefs. Even self-identified atheists, when put under mortality salience conditions, show increased physiological stress when denying the possibility of life after death. Your conscious beliefs and your psychological defenses are not always the same thing. The second piece of this puzzle comes from what cognitive scientists call intuitive mind-body dualism. From a very young age, children seem to intuitively separate mental states from physical reality. In experiments conducted by psychologist Jesse Bering and his colleagues, children were told stories about a mouse that gets eaten by an alligator. When asked whether the dead mouse still feels hungry, still thinks about running, or still wants to go home, young children consistently say yes. They struggle to comprehend that mental processes simply stop. This intuitive dualism does not disappear in adulthood, it simply becomes more sophisticated. Most adults, even those who intellectually understand that consciousness is a product of brain activity, still speak about my body as if it were a possession rather than the entirety of what they are. This intuitive separation of mind and body may have evolutionary roots. Our brains evolved to predict and understand other minds, what psychologists call theory of mind. This ability is crucial for social cooperation, for anticipating the actions of others, for empathy and communication. But the same neural machinery that so expertly models other minds also models our own consciousness as a persistent entity, a continuous observer that exists independently of the physical substrate. When you close your eyes and imagine yourself in a different location, you are engaging exactly this capacity, the ability to mentally separate your perspective from your body. Is it any wonder that this same cognitive architecture struggles to imagine the complete cessation of that observing self? The third factor, driving afterlife beliefs, is what we might call the narrative demand for justice. Humans are deeply committed to the idea that the universe should be fair, that virtue should be rewarded and wrongdoing punished. Psychological research consistently shows that even young children display a strong preference for fair outcomes. But any honest look at the world reveals that fairness is not guaranteed in this life. The wicked sometimes prosper, the innocent sometimes suffer. The belief in an afterlife where justice is finally served addresses this profound cognitive dissonance. The Christian concept of heaven and hell, the Buddhist and Hindu ideas of karma and rebirth, the ancient Greek division between Elysium and Tartarus, all of these systems provide a cosmic accounting that balances the moral ledger. This justice function of afterlife beliefs has profound social consequences. Anthropological research has found that societies with stronger beliefs in moralizing gods and afterlife punishment tend to have larger populations and more complex social structures. The threat of supernatural punishment appears to help humans cooperate at scales that would otherwise be impossible. When people believe that their actions will be judged after death, they are more likely to behave honestly, to help strangers, to contribute to the collective good even when no human witness is present. This does not mean afterlife beliefs were invented solely for social control, but it does suggest that societies with such beliefs had a competitive advantage. The fourth dimension of afterlife belief is perhaps the most emotionally powerful: the need to maintain bonds with those we have lost. Grief is one of the most intense human experiences, and the belief that we will be reunited with loved ones provides genuine psychological relief. Studies of bereaved individuals consistently show that those who believe in an afterlife tend to show better long-term adjustment and less complicated grief. The ritual practices surrounding death funerals, memorials, prayers for the dead serve not only to honor the deceased, but to maintain a sense of ongoing relationship. In many cultures, ancestors are believed to take an active interest in the affairs of the living, offering protection, guidance, and wisdom. This ongoing connection transforms death from an absolute rupture into a changed form of relationship. Consider the Mexican Day of the Dead, or Dia de los Muertos. Far from being a somber occasion, this holiday treats death as a natural part of life and maintains a playful, joyful connection with deceased relatives. Families build ofrendas, elaborate altars with photographs, favorite foods, and marigolds to guide spirits home. The belief that the dead return to visit each year provides comfort and continuity across generations. Similar practices exist in virtually every culture: the Chinese Qingming Festival, the Japanese Obon, the Nigerian Yam Festival honoring ancestors. These are not primitive superstitions but sophisticated psychological technologies for managing loss. Now let us turn to something that might surprise you: the near-death experience phenomenon. Regardless of your views on whether these experiences provide evidence for an afterlife, their psychological impact is undeniable. People who have had near-death experiences, with their characteristic elements of moving through a tunnel toward a light, feeling overwhelming peace and love, encountering deceased relatives, and sometimes reviewing their entire life, almost always return with transformed beliefs about death. The fear of dying vanishes. They become more compassionate, less materialistic, and firmly convinced that consciousness continues after physical death. Intriguingly, similar experiences are reported across cultures, though the specific imagery often reflects the experiencer's religious background. A Christian might see Jesus, a Hindu might see Yamraj, the Lord of Death. This suggests both a universal neurological component and a culturally specific interpretive layer. Skeptics argue that near-death experiences are simply the product of a dying brain, the result of oxygen deprivation, endorphin release, and random neural firing. And this may well be correct. But here is the fascinating part. Even if these experiences are purely neurological, their transformative power remains. The human brain appears to have a built-in mechanism for generating experiences of transcendence and continuity at the moment of death. Whether you interpret this as evidence of an afterlife or as a merciful evolutionary adaptation, it reveals something remarkable about human nature. We are, it seems, equipped to face our final moments with a sense of peace and continuity. The fifth and perhaps most subtle factor is what we might call meaning maintenance. Humans are meaning-making creatures. We cannot help but perceive our lives as stories with themes, character development, and trajectories. But death threatens to make all of that meaning contingent and temporary. What is the point of striving, learning, and loving if everything simply ends? Afterlife beliefs solve this problem by extending the narrative horizon indefinitely. Your choices become eternally significant because they ripple forward into an unbounded future. Your relationships continue, your growth continues. The story does not end, it just moves to a different chapter. Here is something most discussions of afterlife beliefs miss. The psychological benefits appear even when the beliefs are not literally true. Social scientists have found that people who strongly believe in an afterlife report higher levels of life satisfaction, lower death anxiety, and greater psychological resilience in the face of trauma. These benefits persist even when controlling for other factors like religious attendance and social support. In other words, the belief itself provides comfort and meaning regardless of its objective accuracy. This raises a fascinating philosophical question. If a belief provides genuine psychological benefits and causes no harm, on what grounds can we dismiss it as mere illusion? But we should also acknowledge the darker possibilities. Afterlife beliefs can be manipulated for social control, used to justify suffering in this life by promising compensation in the next, or twisted into tools of intimidation. The same belief in postmortem judgment that encourages prosocial behavior can also be weaponized to enforce conformity and suppress dissent. Like all powerful psychological forces, afterlife beliefs can be used for good or ill. So what is the deeper insight that most people miss? It is this: the universality of afterlife beliefs is not evidence for their truth, but it is evidence for their psychological necessity. Humans are not built to accept complete annihilation. Our cognitive architecture, our emotional needs, our social nature, and our drive for meaning all converge to make belief in continued consciousness nearly inevitable. This does not make these beliefs true or false, but it does make them deeply human. Perhaps the most mature approach is not to insist on certainty in either direction, but to acknowledge the mystery. We do not know what happens after death. We may never know. But the very act of wondering, of hoping, of imagining possibilities beyond our current existence, this is not weakness or delusion. It is the expression of a mind that refuses to be limited by the visible, a consciousness that reaches toward transcendence. As you go about your life, carrying your own beliefs and doubts about what comes after, remember this: the impulse to believe is woven into your nature. It has comforted your ancestors through countless losses, given meaning to their struggles, and helped build the cooperative societies that made your existence possible. Whether there is life after death remains an open question. But there is no question that the belief in such possibilities has helped create lives worth living before death. And that, perhaps, is hope enough.